Laura Citron is Chief Executive Officer of London and Partners, the international trade, investment and promotion agency for London. Its mission is to tell London's story to an international audience as a leading world city in which to visit, invest, grow and meet. So Laura, how do you tell London's story today? I mean, it must be a very different story to the pre-COVID-19 one.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is different. And I think the biggest difference is who we're telling the story to. So pre-COVID, on the tourism side, we were very much focused on international tourism as a major driver of value to the city. During lockdown and post, obviously, international tourism isn't really available to us at scale. And so we've pivoted, to use the word of the year, to focusing on Londoners and how we can reassure Londoners and give Londoners confidence to get back out spending in the London economy, both locally and in the centre of town. Because at the moment, it is Londoners who will need to support our businesses through this downturn. Later on, we'll move on back onto UK domestic and international, but for me, that's really been the biggest change. And what we've seen is that whilst in some ways London has been, from a tourism point of view, visitor economy point of view, very vulnerable because of our dependence on international, we also have this great strength in that we have 9 million consumers on our doorstep. And so for me, that's really been the biggest change.
Yeah. So what sort of adjustments do you see to London's economy in the light of the probability that more business will be done virtually and the volume of business travel will reduce as a result of that, and of course global warming? So we'll have less business people coming here, we'll have less traveling, but more business being done at home and virtually.
So it feels as though travel and physical meetings and experiences will become a more premium activity because they'll be more expensive in terms of time, in terms of money costs, but also environmental cost, as you say, and potentially health risk. And because of that, people will be looking for premium travel. And if they're going to travel for business or for an experience, it will have to be really worth it. For me, that actually plays to London's strengths because London has always been a premier product. It is a premium product. And if we're thinking about experiences, we have world-class culture and visitor experiences that can't be imitated anywhere else. And if we're talking about from a business travel or meetings, events, trade show point of view, the reason people come to London to do business, and why would you continue to do your rarer face-to-face meetings in London? Because London has this unique combination of really strong depth in a whole range of sectors, as well as being the cultural sector and as well as being the seat of government of a G7 economy. And that is a unique and really premium proposition. So my sense, and obviously I am an optimist for London, that is my profession to be an optimist for London, but nevertheless, whilst I agree with your hypothesis that overall we might well see a decline in travel, certainly in the medium term, my hope and my aspiration for London is that we can retain or grow our market share because we continue to position as a premium product. And because the kinds of experiences and the kind of encounters and the kind of meetings and events you can have in London, you just can't have anywhere else. Or there are few other global cities that can offer that.
Yeah, so one of London's key strengths is seen, or was seen before COVID-19, its strong agglomeration economy, that people get together, as you say, they wanted to be in London, they want to be together. But do you think COVID-19 might have a longer term effect on the central activity zone as people seek lower density environments outside the centre?
I think to your point on agglomeration, there is great power in clustering and in geographic proximity. And we see that in economies across the world. What London has as an economy is that it has world-leading scale across a whole range of sectors. So financial services, creative industries, technology, pharmaceuticals, and so on. And that is really unique and creates those encounters and those innovations. And if we look at where London's been really strong and had competitive advantage in innovation the last few years, it's been at those intersections of industries. So why have we got a fantastic, very successful fintech ecosystem and industry in London? Because we're very good at financial services and we're very good at technology. We can look at things like gaming. Why have we done well at gaming? Because we're very good at creative and TV and film production, and we had a big post-production business, and we're good at technology. Plus we have the capital in place to fund scaling businesses. So I think that proximity and those meetings of ideas do continue to be really important. To some extent, of course, they can be replaced virtually, but I think they'll continue to be benefit in physical proximity. But to your question about the central activity zone, of course it will need to change. I think we can't think that any aspect of the global economy will be untouched by coronavirus. The challenge I see is being able to disentangle that which is a short-term demand shock, but where once this health crisis has passed, we would expect demand to return to where it was pre-COVID pretty quickly, versus areas where we were already seeing structural change or structural decline, which has now been accelerated by COVID, and we wouldn't expect a recovery. So to take two examples of CAS activity, theatres were booming, were doing very well, thriving pre-COVID. There's no structural reason why post-COVID theatres can't do very well again. We know that traditional physical retail had been declining already for many years, and this has accelerated that by accelerating the shift to e-commerce. So I think we need to look at different uses of the CAS and different sectors and verticals in the CAS and understand which of them are going to need to change fundamentally versus which do we just need to cushion through a short-term acute downturn, but the underlying business model is sound and the demand is there.
So you've talked a bit about Londoners really providing activity in within the city as customers and visitors. But in the longer term, how do you see the future of tourism in London? What can you do as an organisation to perhaps help get it back on track?
Yes, tourism's a really important one, and I think it's just worth saying before we get into it why tourism is so important to London. Partly because it's a big driver of our London economy. 1 in 7 jobs in London relies on tourism. It's a big driver of GVA and tax receipts at the basic level. Tourism is also fundamental because it underpins our culture and lifestyle offer. So we wouldn't have the world-class cultural institutions, the really vibrant grassroots cultural sector that we have, as well as the broader lifestyle, retail, market, leisure, unless we had this flow of international tourists spending in our visitor economy. And that creates this lifestyle and culture, which not only Londoners can enjoy, but we know it's why the best talent in the world wants to come and live in London. And that's why investors come, because the best people are here, and the people are here because the lifestyle is here. So tourism's critical because it underpins London's competitive advantage. I think it's also really important to us for a third reason, which is that for our audiences around the world, in most cases, tourism is the first way that people encounter London. Most people would first come to London as a tourist, fall in love with the city, and then they'll come back as a student, they'll come back as the highly skilled worker, they'll come back as a client, they'll come back when they start their business. And so tourism is so important for us to winning those audiences who'll be so valuable to us throughout their lifetime. It's where we build our brand. It's our shop window to the world. Most people will come here for the first time as a tourist, whether for business or for leisure. And so if we see a really significant long-term reduction in the number of people from outside the UK, or even from outside London in the UK, who are coming to London and experiencing what we have to offer. I think for me that's a really fundamental dampening on our growth potential, not just in tourism, but across the wider economy. So that's why I think tourism is so important above and beyond its economic value alone. I'm afraid to say I don't have great news for you on the tourism outlook. The latest forecast, so forecasting tourism is very, very difficult at the moment, as you would understand. But the latest forecast that Visit Britain's working to are that we would see a recovery of 2019 levels of international tourism by 2024. So that's a pretty slow recovery. 2019, I have to say, was a record year for London. We've seen fantastic growth over the last decade in our international tourism, both in volume and in value and spend. I think we would expect to see some change in the makeup of where our tourists are coming from. So pre-COVID and the US-China trade war that has coincided with COVID, China was our fastest growing international tourism market, along with India. We were seeing 20 to 30% growth year on year. So whilst it was starting from a fairly low base, we would have expected that pretty soon China would have become one of our top tourism markets, just because its growth was far outpacing any other market apart from India, which was also growing very fast. I think we'll have to see the extent to which the Chinese tourism market recovers internationally. Chinese government are very focused on getting Chinese tourists to spend domestically in China at the moment, and obviously trade tensions don't help with perceptions of the UK or the West generally as a great place to visit. So I think we might see some change in the makeup of our tourism, and it might end up in a different place to what we might have forecast 5 years ago.
So it's been rather secondary to our discussion about COVID-19. Brexit is, well, it's here, but we will see the impact of it in the years to come. So how will that affect your story of London?
Yeah, we've obviously been working on Brexit for 3-4 years now. I think it's important to understand that international investors, so we work with both tourists and with investors, have very different views of COVID depending what sectors they're in, and most importantly, which markets they're from. And we try to take a very balanced view. There are markets for whom Brexit is a major reputational issue for the UK. It has a very negative impact on sentiment, particularly in Germany, to a lesser extent some of the other major European markets. And there we have a real job to do in convincing our investors and our trading partners that London is open for business. We want to be part of the future European story, and that we want to have a really strong relationship, and we're prepared to invest in it. There are other markets where the concerns of investors are more practical than emotional. And there we work very closely with investors from around the world to help them to just think through the operationally, what does Brexit mean for you, and what are you going to need to do in terms of the structure and the setup of your business to enable you to scale successfully in London and to use London as a base to scale successfully into the rest of Europe. Most of the investors we support, I should add, are not capital investors. We deal with largely fast-growing tech companies. So most of them are not necessarily hugely affected by the regulatory aspects of Brexit, because they're not trading in goods. The vast majority are trading in services. So there are data and IP issues that matter, and we support and we signpost to expert advice. So I think entrepreneurs are very good at overcoming barriers. That's what they do. What they want is to understand at a practical level, what does this mean for the business? And for us to help them to understand what the solutions might be in a cost-effective way. More broadly, the story that we're telling about London actually hasn't changed fundamentally as a result of Brexit, because it's about our fundamental strengths, and they're not fundamentally changed by Brexit. So capital, talent, technology, pro-innovation regulation, English language, time zone, rule of law, those are the fundamental competitive strengths of London, and they stand, and so we continue to talk about them. of those, I would say for international fast-growing tech companies, talent is the most significant issue.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for answering those questions. I think our viewers will find that very interesting in terms of setting some context about the future of London and how they should approach their work in the years to come. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Peter.